to the next in our workshop series of building your first mobile app. This is session 2, and we're going to be focused on the back end. So first time we were using Ionic, and you got a sense of building out kind of what the user interface might look like. Today, Wes Eldridge is going to be doing a presentation on, how to get the database and some of those pieces set up.
So like Josh was saying, this is building a backend with Prisma. It's the second part. If you would like to follow along, I posted this in the Slack, but I'm not sure if everyone's there. If you go to that GitHub repo, in part 2, there's some instructions. Essentially just to download and install Prisma and download Docker for whatever type of machine that you're using. I've talked a lot here, so I won't go through all of this, but I build software, I help build companies, I love food, the outdoors, physics, and robots. So tonight we're going to just kind of briefly talk about what a front-end and back-end is. We didn't really talk about that in the last one. We'll talk about Prisma for just a second. We'll talk about what GraphQL is, and then we'll do some coding, which you'll be surprised about how much we can do with not writing really any code at all. So what is a backend? It's something that a client can talk to. So we used to have servers, but now we just have this thing called a cloud, and it has a database attached to it. And there's a bunch of different ways you can interact with it. We're going to use something that is called Prisma, and it kind of sits in between the cloud and your database and provides essentially a skeleton to allow different clients to talk to it. So whether it be like a mobile client, a web client, desktop, just kind of anything that you would like to connect to the cloud and to a database, this will kind of let you do it. And it'll do a whole bunch of work for you, and you'll see that in just a minute. It blew my mind. I was over at Josh's house earlier today, like finishing up some of the technical bits of this, and it was just like, this should not.
Make it so easy.
So easy. And so it creates a really easy to scale GraphQL database for you. I think Prisma calls themselves like a ORM replacement via an API, and they have it's kind of built off of GraphQL, which I consider it to be an application query language, but the GraphQL website defines it as an open spec for a flexible API layer. Josh and I have it in pretty much all of our products, not Prisma, but GraphQL. It has allowed us to iterate and build things really, really quickly, and I've kind of fell in love with it over some of the traditional kind of backend, like REST APIs and stuff like that. So it is data agnostic. Prism makes the promise, and they only support a couple of databases right out of the bag right now. That is MySQL, Postgres, and Mongo. But they hope to be able to bring on more databases and essentially be an ORM driver for any type of database via GraphQL. So you don't even really have to worry about your database at all. Like, it builds it and maintains it for you. Which is like kind of really, really cool. Part of the goal of this series is for you to build a mobile app without hardly having to code at all. And this was one of these fantastic tools that we kind of came across just being part of the GraphQL community. So to start off with, I just have an empty directory. There's nothing in it. And so if you already have a Prisma tool installed, you can do Prisma init, and it's going to ask you a bunch of questions. So we're going to be lazy and create new database, but you were saying earlier that you have an existing database, and so you could select that option as well. Can you see that? Do I need to zoom in some more? I'm going to be lazy and create a new database. I'm just going to use MySQL. And it gives you a set of commands. So if you're using if you're using one of their databases, you'll have to have Docker installed, and so you can just boot it up by saying Docker compose up. In the Git repo, there's all this code, and I'll talk about that later, but right now it's just any other plain directory as we walk through it.
Doesn't matter. It can kind of be just like a plain directory.
Yeah, like I'm in my temporary directory in a folder called Prisma backend. So if we look in the directory now, Prisma has created us a data model file, a Docker compose file, which essentially defines what the service looks like, and then a prism.yaml file, which is just a configuration file for your service. So right now there's a user in there, and we're not actually going to do anything with users in this particular talk. You'll find some examples in the repository I'll share later that show you how to do authentication in users, but it's just too much. Your GraphQL, your Docker compose file, and then finally your configuration file. And so we can look at the docs a little bit later on to see what all you can put in there. But you can specify environments, essentially trade these files out when you're moving in between like production and local working environments. We can say,
I'm a little bit behind you.
while that continues,
Yeah, go through it. Okay.
it will load this beautiful tool. It's built off of a platform called Graphical. And so right now we should just have a user in here, maybe? Because we haven't deployed yet. Let me run that, sorry. We'll run Prisma deploy, and that will push everything to the service. There we go. We'll refresh again. Great. So if we look at this kind of base schema that it provides for it in the data model file, it's a user with an ID and a name. And so this is all we've defined. And the Prisma kind of API that the CLI does for you, you end up getting all of this stuff for free. Just by defining your schema, you get pretty much all of your CRUD operations, which are create, update, delete, and read. And so you can see what some of the query looks like, and so all the things that you can do with the query. So you can do pagination, you can do basic searches, and it kind of tells you what you can expect from the user type. And then you can click in and also see what it looks like for all of your CRUD operations. Create surveys, update surveys, and everything that you need to do to get a basic app off the ground is just write schema. And then redeploy, and you'll have be able to do nested searching and querying across all the different resources, which is kind of cool. Over here in this little helper right over here,
Yeah.
to see what everything is set up.
Okay, user.
And so we only have user right now.
Okay.
And so we'll go back into the editor. Okay. So now we're just going to kind of walk through some of the pieces of data that, what would be be able to support the app that Ryan worked on in the first bit. So we have a survey, and it has an ID. And so this unique bit tells Prism, when it does all the compiling, that it needs to make this like an index field, like a unique index field when it creates the migration for the table. And we'll give it a title, which is a string. And so the exclamation marks on the end of the schema type, it means this is required for in the database. So we have description, and we'll say string. We also want that. So they provide date, time, out of the bag for you, and those will automatically update for you. So like your created at, updated at, and it also does soft deleting as well, so there'll actually be a deleted at in there. So we know that our survey is going to have a question, and we want all of these fields as well. And we're going to say the question has a question that's a string. And then we'll jump in, and so we also going to need to have type. And so we're going to, this is something interesting, it's an enum. I'm going to copy that too, so I can remember all the question types. But you can define an enum, and it will create that enum in the database for you. And so you can actually just refer to it in the schema, just like that. And that's not where I wanted it, though. Yes, it is. And we have a question. That needs to be a string. Okay.
This is going to create structure in
your database for you. Yeah, it does everything for you. Later on, once we kind of just get this working kind of basically, we'll go hop in the docs, and so it'll do migrations for you, so you can just add fields directly into this, and it will add them the next time that you deploy into your database. But you can also change fields. There are some annotation bits for setting default values on different fields. We're not going to, I'll show you in the docs where that's at. We're not going to do any of that today. We have answers. We're going to say this is a string too. That just needs to be single. And then we'll do one more. It will be response. And it will have all this stuff in it. We'll also add a user. And so now we have essentially kind of the base tables, but we need to define some relationships. And so how do all the tables talk to each other? How does the schema talk to each other? And it's really super simple. I'm going to move this up to the top. We're going to say, we know that for a survey, we'll have multiple questions for it, right? We're just going to say questions and question. So once again, this kind of defines, it means we're going to have a collection of questions that go along with it. It's just like your normal array brackets. And then inside of that, we want to have a question. We want to have at least one question, and so that's why it's required. And then we'll do the other outside required, meaning I think that's how they define where a relationship's going to be. So we'll do the same thing. So some questions, we'll have some answers. And then a response will have a user, which will have that connection. It will have an answer, which will be required. And so what's really cool, we have all of the relationships going from the top all the way back down. We can do those in reverse. So we can say that a question will belong to a survey. And then we can also say that an answer will belong to a question. So it kind of allows you to go both directions now, which is kind of cool. So if we come back over here, we can run Prisma deploy again. You can see it's creating the relationships, creating the enum for the questions, and so it kind of gives you like step by step what it's doing. Tells you what has changed. And so now when we hop back over here and give it a refresh and open this up, we have so much more. We have all the CRUD operations for all of those. So we pretty much have a bunch of data and a bunch of essentially APIs set up to be able to represent what we built last time. And so we'll kind of just hop back over here and we'll go through and just kind of talk about some of these. So like if we look at the survey, you can see the survey has questions. And so now you can click into questions and answers. And so you can see how that relationship is nested all the way through. And it tells you what it feels that you can expect across all of them. Same thing for all of your mutations. So we have like all of your creates, all of your updates across the board, all of your deletes for all of those resources, and all of your kind of update and upserts. So upsert is if it exists, update it. If not, create it. And they also provide a subscription layer, so you can actually get data pushed to your client. We won't talk about that tonight, though. So we're going to add, well, I think there's already no, we'll do one. I don't think there's one in this database. And so we'll give it a description of this is just a test. And so this is what it actually looks like for you to, they call them mutations. And this is what it looks like to actually call the database or call the API. And so if we hop over here, we'll look at this create survey. And it takes some data.
What do you want? What are you looking at?
And so we can actually step through it. We'll do one just straight. So we'll do mutation, new survey, and then we're going to call the create. So this one that has autocomplete built into it. And it's going to be like a function, data, and then it will return a survey, and so we'll define that in a minute. But it has a title, and so we can say Spark demo survey. We'll do description for the and then what else can we pass into it? Okay, that's all we need. And so now we can say questions. And so you can actually create all of this. And so when you look at a database there, we know we have the survey table, the questions table, the answers table. So now we can just say questions create. And because our questions, we can have multiple questions in there, we can just pass it in an array. And it will start to autocomplete inside that array for you too. So we'll say type, and we're going to give it a yes, no. We're going to give it a question, which is a string.
That section that's hidden.
And so we're going to nest one more because questions have answers, right? So we're going to do the same thing. And we're going to say create again. So you can see it's like you can just pass in all of this data in one request and kind of build out an entire survey, which is kind of neat. So we're creating a survey here, and so we hop back over here. A survey has a title and it has a description, and so that's the data that we provide. The ID created at and updated at are things that are just maintained by the database. And then we said that we had questions that go along with a survey, and so the questions are, you have a type and you have a question. And so those are only two fields that we really care about there.
Because it's already nested within the survey, it's going to be the database, it's going to be that.
Yeah, well, that's because we define that it belongs to a survey, and then also up here that there's questions. Same thing for the answers.
Is an ID like an auto increment?
Yeah, when we query it, you'll see what it looks like. It's not actually an auto increment. It is like one of those weird UUID hashes, which people are in favor of now over the auto increment. And then, so we can say our answer, yes. And this actually needs to be, again, because there's multiple answers to a question. Come back up. No, not now, no. You know, I'm the best speller in the world. And so once we have this really complicated thing, it's essentially just a function call that you pass in all the data that you want. That's how you can think of it. This is like a function. You have one argument that's data, and this is what your data looks like. And then what you get back, this is what the return data that you want. So you can say title, description, questions, and we want the type, we want the question, and then they have answers, and we want the answer. So it's kind of a weird syntax. Most of the time you feel like you should put all of your logic, if this is kind of thought of as a function, in here, but it's just all of the return data that you want. So if you also wanted the IDs, you could look at it, you get the IDs, you get the timestamps.
Oh, wait.
So there's an answer, and the answer is just a string. There's no, I don't have like any validation logic to make sure that your answers conform to any particular thing. Like I would say in this, and getting started, I would do as much of that on the client client side as I could. The data types that you're given through GraphQL are string, like float number, and ID. And then you can make arrays, and then you can build complex data structures based off of those primitive types. And then, you know, I defined an enum up here myself. So these are the particular enum values that you would expect. So you can also define things that are like scalars, which are just like dates or other type of things. And so it's really flexible, you know. So now when we click play, we get back this bit of data, and it is our newly created survey. I should have brought back the ID, but we'll just open up another one. And so this is how you query your data after making it. Query, and we'll say we want surveys, and we want ID, title, description, and then we want all the questions that come along with it, the type, the question, and then the answers that go along with it. And then when we run it, see there's that really funky ID, and then you get back everything. And so to get like all the data, we can get updated app, ID, so we can run it and you can get. So yeah, we didn't do anything, right?
Yeah, I'm just like, it created all of these different mutations.
Yeah. So like we have an API and under 50 lines of code that represent what our front end. And it's really not even code, it's just a schema declaration, right? And we were able to create new surveys. You can create one individually if you wanted to, like, I guess we can also say delete a survey. I've not actually done this one yet.
And then, so where you, that's just in the new tab?
We'll say where ID's 1. I guess that is how. I don't know how those look or how aware looks in this. Oh well, we'll go hop into the documentation. Right. So the documentation's pretty reasonable. Their getting started is pretty great. Like we ran through that pretty quickly today. And so there's a big section on the data model and how you can create the data model and what are all the different fields and stuff in it. So they actually provide you more stuff just as kind of like helpers. Documentation is almost set up like a tutorial, so you can work your way through it and cover all the high points, and at the end of it you'll have, I think, like a blog type of thing or something that's like around a book. So there's like string, integer, float, boolean, date time, enum, JSON, ID, do your lists as you're required, your unique. And you can jump over into relations, and so maybe we're already there. Maybe we've already passed it. So this is one of those annotations that you can provide, so you can give a field a default value. No, you would do that here. So if you wanted like your default title, be like Kevin Bacon or something like that. Anytime that you created a title that didn't have, that wasn't present, it would be called Kevin Bacon.
Is there a big repository of pre-made things?
So there are some examples, and so if you come here, they have them in a bunch of different languages. You know, we're primarily more of a JavaScript folk, so there's Node versions here, and so you can see what schema delegation looks like. So if you've kind of outgrown what Prisma can do, like you can kind of define a lot of that stuff manually. We were talking about the mutations earlier, so you can rename them. So give it the old name, post, and so it knows where to go. So like if you're going to rename a table from post to story, you could do that. You can also rename fields. And then as you add and delete fields, they'll also maintain that for you. There's something that we were, where are you? Okay, so you can also have some stuff that defines behavior for your multiple tables, so your relationship behavior. So you can say, if my parent is deleted, you can cascade this down to me. So if you're using a SQL database, you can give behavior of how things happen on delete, which is really, really cool. If you don't give any behavior, it just sets that ID to null. So you'll just have a bunch of null data there. But here's like you can define your data model, and so you can actually have multiple files if you wanted to break stuff up. So if you wanted to have like all your enums, like all of your scalar types, and so you can kind of break apart things, so it's a little bit easier to manage. You can change your host and how that's set up. So if you were deploying to like DigitalOcean or Heroku or something like that, you can essentially kind of have a production data file and a like local one and go with it. So if you're using, they have like a JSON web token interface, and so you can define a secret key there that will be used to generate all your other keys for you so it's secure. Generators, then hooks. You can change some of your subscription stuff, and so a subscription is essentially just a WebSocket that you get data pushed to your client anytime anything happens instead of you having to go ask the server to get your data, which is pretty dope. They also provide seeds, and so if you wanted to have a big collection of data that you wanted to use for testing, so like if you were sharing this with other people to work on, you could give it a bunch of XML files, JSON files, anything like that. And so when someone started working on the project, they could just see their database and have all of the like example data that they need. And there's some more configurations, so like it even provides it so if you want to break out some of your configurations a little bit more, how to do that. There's some stuff about some of the GraphQL concepts, so if you're kind of more interested in how some of that works, you can jump into it. They talk about how to query your data as well, how to do subscriptions. It doesn't look like they have told people how to handle errors yet.
Wes, why don't we,
With examples, they have some great tutorials, and so, you know, there's a whole list of deploying, and it's like deploying using all of the different services out there. I think there's like DigitalOcean manual, so if you're running on bare metal, like this is how you would do it. Kubernetes, like pretty much anything that you want to do with it. And there's some other great little tutorials here as well. This is a neat little representation of kind of how you can think about it. And there's like all your clients, your cloud service with Prisma behind it, talking to all your databases. I do feel like I should plug so you can get it for free for 3 users. I don't know what any of this means. You can do a team version of it. You can do the enterprise, which is like a managed on-premises version of it with great support. And because everyone's going serverless now, you can also do a serverless hosting of it. What is really cool is that you can kind of bootstrap that node process manually. And so there's another great tool that if you want to kind of see like query optimization, there is Apollo, which is what we'll use for our client. They also have a server for it, which gives you query metrics. And so you can see what queries are taking longer, like, you know, and you can essentially get a performance metrics. So you can actually, if you need to go in and manually tune some stuff that is not performant, it lets you know, which is nice. And it also starts off for free. So yeah, they kind of give you some basic metrics here, just essentially give you performance metrics of how well things are doing. You don't get that for the free version, which is okay. You can just use the free version with Apollo Engine and get the same stuff. I've kind of linked to some other resources. There's a couple of great videos. This guy is right here is actually the person who created, I think it started off as like GraphQL or something like that. And he's the creator of it. He does a great talk on it. There's some other kind of really interesting stuff if you want to dive deeper into it.